Hello, and welcome to SUU Community Connect Learn from Home series, hosted by your community education program. I'm your host, Nicole Stout, and I'm happy that you could join us today. Community Reads is a program created to keep our community connected during this time of staying at home. We invite you to mute your microphone if you are joining us on Zoom and type any questions you might have for the presenters using your chat box. See the mute and chat box options at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And for those of you joining us on Facebook Live, we welcome you to join in the conversation as well. We are excited to welcome our guest today, Kelsey Cook. Hey, Kelsey.
Hi.
Kelsey Cook was raised in Las Vegas, Nevada, and came to Southern Utah to go to SUU. She graduated in 2018 with a bachelor's in English literature and an associate's in Equine Studies. She worked for the Iron County Today as a full-time reporter, then accepted a position with St. George News as their Cedar City reporter. She has a Norwich terrier mix named Scout, who goes with her everywhere. She got married last August to her husband and loves spending time with him and his family. Hey, Kelsey.
Hi.
So I wanted to ask you, give us some of your background. What brought you to SUU from Las Vegas?
So when I was a senior in high school, I applied to a couple of different places. I applied to SUU because it was kind of close to Las Vegas. I applied to Grand Canyon University because they actually came and presented to my school. And then I also applied to Wichita State University because I have family in Kansas and I was originally born there. SUU ended up giving me the best price as far as tuition and scholarships and things like that go. We did a campus visit and I was like, yep, that's the one.
How was it for you?
It was good.
It's colder than Vegas.
It's a lot colder than Vegas up here, that's for sure. So it's kind of, I went to a charter school when I was in high school down in Vegas, and SUU basically felt like the college version of my high school. You know, the professors really get to know you there, and it was very personalized education, and so I felt like I was very successful there.
Oh, that's awesome. Tell me, what is Equine Studies? Educate me on that. What is that? And I don't even know if I'm saying it right.
You are. So equine just means horse.
Oh, okay. They have that at SUU?
Yeah, so SUU actually has a farm, and they've got horses, cattle, sheep, and then they also grow alfalfa, I'm pretty sure. And so for the scholarship I was on, I had to have 15 credits a semester, and I was 1 credit short. And so I found this class called Horse Production Practices, and I was like, what is that? Let's sign up for that. So I go out to this farm, and Lee Wood taught it. And for those of you who know Lee Wood, you know that he's an awesome dude. And he had us get up and introduce ourselves and what our major is and all that. And I kept hearing that, oh, I'm majoring in equine studies. And I was like, what? You can do that? And so I actually learned how to ride horses, and about nutrition and science and some things like that for that associate's degree. It's basically just what you would learn growing up on a farm, but in college.
So did you not grow up on a farm in Vegas then? You didn't know anything about horses before?
No, I was definitely a city girl. My mom's family comes from farming and ranching. So one of my grandpas has had horses and cows and stuff like that. So I knew that I liked horses, but I never actually got to do anything with it until I went to SUU. So it was pretty cool that I got to ride horses for credit towards a degree.
That's awesome. That rides right up there with I did bowling as a class. You never know what you
There you go, yeah.
I thought I should minor in bowling. That would be fantastic. But I don't think I could use that for anything. So tell me, what influenced you to want to become a writer? Like, why did you decide to become a reporter?
I didn't really. So I was just looking for, my parents supported me through college. I was really fortunate that way. And I was just kind of looking for a job to gain experience. and the SUU Journal had some openings. So I just applied to be a reporter because I was an English major, and I was like, well, I write papers, I can figure out how to write articles. They hired me as a copy editor, and then one of the news editors at the time worked for the Iron County Today. And so he basically set up my interview for me with the incoming editor over at the Iron County Today. So I worked part-time for them for, I think, 2 years. And then once I graduated, I was like, hey, can I have a real job? And they said, sure.
So how did you go from writing for them to writing for St. George News?
So St. George News actually kind of approached me and said, hey, we feel like you'd be a good fit for the things that we're trying to do in Cedar City. And it just kind of worked out that it was a really good opportunity for me to take advantage of.
So how is it being a reporter? Is it harder than you thought? Is it easy? How is it? What is that life like?
There are a lot of good parts to it. It's kind of interesting, because one of the things that I've had the hardest time with is, like, it's not a 9-to-5 job. It can be an 8 to 8 job, or it can be a noon to 10 p.m. job, or different things like that. And so it just kind of depends on what's going on in the community for me to report on. And so the hardest part about it is definitely finding that work-life balance in, like, when do I stop working? When do I start working? When do I get to eat dinner? Like, those kinds of things. But on the flip side of that, Cedar City is a really awesome community to do this kind of thing in. I've made a lot of really great connections. I have really good relationships with people. I feel very confident in just going out and getting the information I need from the best person to get that information from.
Do you have to go out and find your own stories, or do you have people that come to you, or is there someone that you report to where they assign you stories? How does that work?
So it's a little bit of both. So the St. George News editors, they're on all the email lists ever. And so sometimes they hear of things or they know of things. They're like, hey, go cover this. I do have connections in the community that I've established. So now people will come to me and say, hey, this is going on, or hey, I heard about this. And then it's also part of my job to find stories myself as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you have like a phone handy where people call you, where you try to, like, go on site, or is it just something that you hear about later and then you write about it?
So it just depends on what it is. With St. George News being entirely online, we want as quick a turnaround as possible. So say for a traffic accident, once I'm notified of that, go out, get the pictures, get the video, get the information from the public information officer or whoever's on scene, and then go right back to your computer and write it up as soon as you can. They're a little bit lax on, if something happens at 8 o'clock at night and it's an event that's not real pressing or not real, I can write about it the next morning. So it just kind of depends on what's going on and what the topic is.
And deadlines, I'm sure.
And deadlines and things like that. Yeah. So it just kind of depends on what it is, but for the most part, they seem to be pretty respectful of me having a life still.
Yeah, giving you some time off.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking about writing, today we're going to be discussing a book that you chose, Green Hills of Africa, for our book discussion today, written by Ernest Hemingway.
Yes.
Green Hills of Africa is Ernest Hemingway's lyrical journal of a month on safari in the great, I love it. You have a copy. I was thinking today, I don't have a copy of this, dang it, because I've been listening to it. Oh, that's awesome. It's a lyrical journal of a month on safari in the great game country of East Africa, where he and his wife Pauline journeyed in December of 1933. His rich description of the beauty and strangeness of the land and his passion for the sport of hunting combined to give Green Hills of Africa the freshness and immediacy of a deeply felt personal experience that is the hallmark of the greatest travel writing. So first question, why did you decide to choose this book for our discussion today?
So I actually was introduced to this book in an SUU class. Professor Ayton taught a class on Hemingway, and I was one of the only people in the class that actually liked this book. And I happened to read it at a time where I was just starting hunting and being able to hunt and different things like. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good.
So yeah, so we read it when I got my first buck deer tag. And so I really related to that aspect of it because I had just gotten done with going out early in the morning and going out late at night and all those kinds of things that he talks about. I mean, for deer and on a very minor scale compared to what he was doing, but I really related to it. And I do feel like a lot of who I am is connected to writing. And so the way that he talks about writing and hunting, it was just so easy for me to be like, yeah, like I understand. And it's just one of the ones that's really stuck with me. So
What did this book say to you about Ernest Hemingway's personality? Did you feel like you kind of got to know him a little bit better through this book?
yeah, so you can definitely see his competitiveness coming out. There's a lot of jealousy because the people that he's hunting with get bigger, better animals than he does. And he drinks a lot of whiskey in the book, and he talks a lot about critics,
Mm-hmm.
as far like literary critics. And so, in studying Hemingway, that he was a pretty competitive person, and he frequently would go into depressions and things like that after reading what critics had to say about his work. And he was pretty much an alcoholic, so
Yes.
oh,
Like it.
so that's kind of those things definitely come out in the book, I would say.
In this book, his wife is with him during his safari. Do you think she's a good match for him? Do you think they go well together?
Um, so Hem Hemingway kind of had this pattern of getting married and then cheating on his wife and then marrying that woman. And so Pauline was actually his second wife. And if you're willing to put up with someone like Hemingway, then good for you, I suppose.
She seems like a good sport. She's just like,
She,
whatever.
I mean, if going on a safari is not something that you can just like do necessarily. You're camping out, you're not showering, you're out, you're up early, you're up late, it's not exactly a life of comfort being out in the East African landscape for 30 days at a time. So
Mm-hmm.
it definitely shows some good sport kind of characteristics that she's willing to go with him for sure.
Yeah. Do you remember this came out years ago? There was a book about Ernest Hemingway's life when he was in World War I. And I can't remember the guy. Oh, who was the actor that played him? But Sandra Bullock was his love interest. She was the nurse. There's this like love story. I don't know if you ever saw it. It's called In Love and War, I think is what it's called. The
I
movie. Did you ever see
Yes,
that movie?
I did never see the movie, but I did read most of the book that it was about.
Well, I just thought it was interesting because you have Hemingway, and he seems like such a tragic character. And I watched it in high school, and I was rooting for him. Sandra Bullock, she's amazing. And
Yeah,
you have that like, oh, you love the actress, and so you're
right.
rooting for them to get together. And then there's this like tragic scene where they don't end up together, and you're like, what a tragic figure. But I think so for me as a high schooler watching it, I was super angry. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Why wasn't there a happily ever after and rainbows and all the good feels? And I think that helps you to see Hemingway's personality of the tragic, where he came from, his dysfunction in relationships. I think it's more about giving us a view of what he was like, not like, he didn't have a happy life.
Yeah, for sure. He didn't really have a happy or an easy life. Um, and I think you'll find, I mean, with most forms of art, whether it's literature or painting or music or anything like that, a lot of what's relatable to a lot of people comes from a place of discomfort or pain
Mm-hmm.
or, those kinds of things. I mean, Hemingway, as far as I know, and what I've read of him, he's
Mm-hmm.
pretty notorious for struggle, 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 struggle. That's it. There's no
Mm-hmm.
happy ending.
Yeah.
It's just struggle.
I had this in this book. Hemingway is always looking for the elusive kudu. And I had to look it up because I'm like, what is a kudu? And it's and I should have printed out a picture, but it's an antelope looking thing. And even when he finally gets one, he feels his friend gets a bigger one. Carl is always just so lucky. What do you think that says about him in Hemingway, in his relationship? We just kind of like, but then like in sportsmanship, I guess he does that in the book about authors too, where he kind of starts talking about authors. He has nothing nice to say about anybody.
Yeah, so I think that's where you see one of the things that he really struggles with come to light. And if you look at the life that he lived and the things that he wrote and all that kind of stuff, and how seriously he took what the critics wrote about his work and all that kind of stuff, that is a pretty good representation of his competitive nature and things like that, and a lot of his, like, I mean, like I said, he depicts a lot of struggle in a lot of his books, and sometimes that comes across as having a pretty negative perspective. There's the word.
Mm-hmm.
Having a pretty negative perspective on things like that. And so, the fact that he's always concerned about what other people think and what other people are doing, I think speaks to what was going on with him in his life.
Mm-hmm. Unlike The Sun Always Rises and The Old Man and the Sea, which are two of his very, very famous works, and they are fiction, Green Hills of Africa is one of only two works of nonfiction and very much lesser known. Do you feel Hemingway is a better fiction or nonfiction writer?
Um, so like I said, I'm one of the only people that I know. I think I have like one or two other people that I know that actually liked this book. A lot of people, when we discussed it in class, a lot of other
Mm-hmm.
students were like, it doesn't sound like Hemingway. It doesn't feel like Hemingway because it's not, wrought with drama and confusion and things like that. And um I don't know how to choose between his nonfiction and his fiction because I relate to Green Hills of Africa so much as far as hunting and writing goes. Um, but also, there's some short stories, and The Old Man and the Sea is just one of the greatest things that has ever been written in my mind. So I think both have their place, but I think the rest of the world definitely prefers his fiction.
Mm, I think I agree with you on that. Do you feel that famous authors should write at least a nonfiction about themselves, just as a general rule, along with their famous works? Now you feel like you kind of got to see more Hemingway, see what he was really like in this?
So, the thing is like in a lot of his fiction works, you can see his representation of himself also. So I think that the truly interesting part about this somewhat autobiographical piece is that it's novelized. It's written in the form of a novel. It's not like, here's my life. It's here's a
Mm-hmm.
story that just happens to be true. And so I mean, it's probably good practice for people to write about themselves, but I think it's hard to do accurately. A lot of us would be tempted to not put the jealousy and not put that competitiveness in the story, but he did.
Yeah. Yeah, he was very honest.
He
Definitely
was.
honest. At times I'm like, oh wow, he was way honest. I wonder if it was just
Yeah, there were a lot of
okay.
times there were a lot of times where it's like, wow, that probably took a lot to admit about yourself.
Right. Were there any areas in the novel that really were your favorite, that really stood out to you?
You know, I would probably have to say that the instances in which he's describing how he like is experiencing hunting. So, you know, when he probably more in the middle kind of the book, where he's talking about like what it's like to pull the trigger and some different things like that. I think,
conscience things.
yeah, just kind of like where he's really going into or trying to figure out, why do I like this? Why is this good? Why is this a good feeling for me? Because I mean, no one wants to enjoy the act of killing necessarily. And so that's kind of one of my favorite sections or things that he addresses in the book. Because from my experience and what I know from other people who hunt and things like that, it's not about the actual killing of the animal. It's, you know, it's allowed me to spend time with people in a way that I get to learn something that they learn. It's population control, it's a skill, it's, you know, it's all these different kinds of things. And so really searching and trying to get into that, why do I like this so much, is one of the really interesting parts, especially as it relates to his views on writing. Because he compares hunting and writing, you know, he uses them almost interchangeably throughout this book. And so to think of writing as the act of hunting is really interesting to me.
And how do you see that with the writing and the hunting, the way he presents that in the book?
So very early on, he starts comparing them. And one of the first thing that he talks about is essentially a deadline. And so he talks about, man, wouldn't it be great to just hunt until you got the animal? But he's only got 3 days left until the rains move in, and he's going to be trapped in this particular spot. So he's got to leave. And so just things like that, where everything is better with no deadline, because you have the time that should be allotted to do it properly and to do it right. But that also is kind of a double-edged sword there, because if you don't have a deadline, you might not ever get it done, right?
Or take a really long time.
Or take a really, really long time. And so, you know, when you're thinking about things like college and being a reporter and having deadline, I mean, I have a daily deadline, right? Like, and things about that. He's basically saying, like, his view is nothing that has happened on a deadline is going to be as good as it could have been.
And I have heard that a lot of people that have their very first novel and it's this big hit, but they had years to write this novel, and then they have to do a follow-up and they have this short deadline. And I have noticed that with like great works, the first one just seems so enriched, and it always seems like sometimes the second one seems very rushed.
Yeah, and it's really, really interesting. I mean, you know, with a lot of articles, I have more than a day to write them, so it's not like I feel rushed necessarily. Excuse me. But even with you know, just take hunting season, for instance, you know, you only have 10 or 11 days in some cases. And so a lot of people feel rushed, and they rush things and they don't do it right. And so that's why they don't get an animal. But he talks about, it's really interesting to me the way that he talks about hunting as though the word writing could be interchanged.
This book was written in 1935. Do you think safari hunting and the general public's feel about big game hunting has changed a lot since then? He's pretty descriptive in his hunting. And he was talking about a hyena at one point, where a hyena will even start eating its own entrails after it's been shot, because they're so just this awful animal that just scrounges for everything. How do you feel about that? The public feel about, like, could a book like that be written in today's society, do you think?
So I think big game hunting gets a bad rap, because you'll notice all these different Facebook posts. Oh, owner of this business went out and shot a rhino, a beautiful rhino that we need to keep, and all this kinds of thing. But big game hunting and safaris and things like that are really not that much different than just, you know, going out for turkey season or whatever it is that a lot of people in Utah do. And I think some things that people don't understand is that people pay thousands and thousands of dollars just for the right to be on that safari in the first place. And all of that money goes into those communities. And then on top of that, it is population controlled. It is regulated as far as what animals you can get or not get, and those kinds of things like that. And then on top of that, you're not allowed to bring the meat back to the States. So that just goes into the local communities and feeds those people, as well as puts that money into that economy, into those communities and things like that. So it's not, there is always going to be the one person that ruins it for everyone else. There's, just like in any,
There's always that.
There's always that. But as far as like the general, like the average hunter is not out just to kill something. It's a lot more about the experience, and it's a lot more about the beauty and the appreciation for what you're doing in the land that you're in and the animals that you see.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you'd like to hang out with Hemingway for a day, or on safari for that matter?
So if I was gonna hang out with Hemingway, I would probably choose to do it on a safari, because that means that I'd get to have a gun too. I think I would if I had the opportunity. But I probably wouldn't want to say much.
Would you ask him advice on how to write?
I'm not sure that I would, because I think his answer would be just write it. I think that's kind of what he would say. And on top of that, if you want advice from him, you can go read any of his books and they'll give you advice on writing.
True. So with the writing, with you being a reporter and writing and talking about Ernest Hemingway, have you ever personally thought about writing a novel?
I've thought about it, but my strength does not lie in creativity. So it's been
a lot of time.
It's been a thought, and that's pretty much all it's been, is a thought.
So I wanted to go back to your job as a reporter. What are some of your favorite stories that you have been able to write about?
So the first story that I ever wrote for the Iron County Today was about the Diamond Z Shire horses.
Oh.
So I don't know if you know what those are, but there's
no idea.
So Shire horses are big draft horses, taller than me at the shoulders, and I'm 5'3". So they're these big draft horses, and there's a local community member who has 5 or 6 of them, and they're actually trained to drive a cart. And they're trained they can be 2 in the front, 2 in the back, 1 in the front, 3 in the back, like they're interchangeable like that. And they were just hanging out in the IFA parking lot, and getting to know the community and just doing a local kind of thing like that. So I went out and I did kind of a feature piece on these horses and their place in the community. And they go off and they perform in rodeos and stuff like that. And so I was invited to, because of that article, I put that out for the Iron County Today. And because of that, I stopped by the rodeo a couple weeks later or whatever, and I actually got to ride one of them, and that was really cool.
Okay, was that terrifying? That's a long ways to fall if you fall off.
It's a long ways to fall if you fall off, but they're big enough that I felt like I had a pretty good seat there.
Are they nice? I guess every horse has its own personality. You just have to find a nice one.
For sure. And in a lot of those bigger breeds, they're very similar to dogs, where how Chihuahuas are very anxious a lot of the time and things like that. Those smaller dogs have a lot more energy and sometimes aggression and things like that. Ponies are the same way for me. So the bigger breeds have a little bit more calm demeanors
Maybe they
and
know they're
things.
the big dog and they don't have to worry about
Yeah,
trying to prove anything.
yeah. But I mean, you know, you stand next to those horses and they think about not they notice not to step on your foot and things like that. So they're really smart.
Mm, mm. So, what does your job look like now with COVID and everything going on? Has it changed much?
Not really. Um, so with St. George News, we have, I think, 7 or 8 reporters that are down based in St. George. So those reporters are only just now being let back into the office to work. But being
Hmm.
based in Cedar City, I worked from home mostly anyway. So the only thing that's really changed much is I'm not doing interviews and phone and things like that in person. It's more
Hmm.
about it's doing things more over the phone. But hopefully I get to start going and doing interviews in person a little bit more now that things are opening back up.
Things are kind of opening back up. What future stories are you going to be involved in?
So I can't really talk too much about what I'm working on just because it's still in the works or anything like that. So I can't really speak too much to that.
Hmm. Do you find writing to be very political?
Hey, that's a
That looks like a
tricky
yes.
question. Um,
And tell me
so
in what way, but does it seem that way?
um, so in essence, I can write about political things, but
Hmm.
my I try the hardest to keep my own politics and feelings out of it. So
Hmm.
it can cover a lot of politics. I can be writing about a lot of politics. Um, but for the most part, you know, my views on that kind of stay out of it.
Mm. And you were telling me earlier that there was a city council meeting tonight. Is that right? Is
So
that something
city,
that you're going to be covering
yeah, so city council is actually tomorrow night. Um,
tomorrow night? That was it.
yes, there's a debate amongst county commissioners tonight. Um, and those are the types of things that I cover and write
Hmm.
about to let people know what's going on.
Yeah. Do you know what are the big things that they're going to be talking about? Can you tell us that just so that people have an idea if they want to go? Because that's usually open to the public, right?
Yeah, so the agenda is public information. So you can go on the city council's website and get that agenda. They're going to be bringing up the budget tomorrow night and
Which I'm
the
sure is a hot topic right now with a bunch of cuts. I've heard all over everyone's scrambling with budget cuts.
Yeah, so that has the potential to be pretty interesting. And then they're starting on having cost estimates for the recreation center that the city decided to move forward with recently. So,
Mm, that should be interesting. I have a couple of questions that are coming in. Timothy on Facebook would like to know, is it hard to remain unbiased? Is that even still a thing for today's reporters?
yes, it's really hard to remain unbiased. I try not to let this show in my writing, and thank goodness we have editors. I am pretty opinionated. I definitely have my own opinions about what's going on and what people are saying and things like that. But I try very hard with the words that I use and how I phrase things and things like that to do my best to keep my opinion out of it, because it's not, you can ask me about my opinion and I'll tell you, but it's not my job to report my opinion. It's my job to report on what is happening and what other people said and things like that. So yes, it's hard to keep my opinions out of it, but it is something that I take a lot of pride in being able to do.
Yeah. Chris on Facebook would like to know, what are your favorite events to write about?
So the favorite kind of events that I like to write about are typically the more positive community centered ones. So if there's things going on where it's a group of people getting together to have a good time or to support someone else in the community, just the positive stories of people helping people are probably my favorite, and those not only because they're positive, but those are the ones that I really make the most connections on, and connect with people really well there.
Richard on Facebook would like to know what happens when you write about something considered controversial. Do you get a lot of emails and phone calls? Do you get a lot of feedback from stuff like that?
So, when I worked for the Iron County Today, since that was a on paper publication, I didn't really get too much going on there. But with St. George News, it's all online, and my email is posted right under all of my stories. And
so is that like an open invitation?
So I haven't really had a lot of controversial things to write about just yet. And so mostly, I mean, I do get comments and things like that from people. But mostly what we get is spam of people wanting to put my blog post in your article. So, so not as of yet. But you never know what the future holds. I imagine that there will be some flack and some comments and things like that, but it's just policy to not respond to any of that. The article should speak for itself.
Oh yeah, that's good. That's good. Natalie is curious. Did you always want to be a reporter? I know you said you didn't really start out as a writer, but did you ever, when you were younger, think about being a reporter or like talking to people or asking questions?
So I'm actually an introvert, believe it or not, and being a reporter is not really something that I ever imagined for myself. It's not something that I even thought was in the realm of possibility. But turns out I think I'm pretty good at it, so it's working for now.
Oh, sounds like it. I'm going to be looking for your name on articles that come out in the St. George News. That's something that I'm always looking at, St. George News, just constantly. And I was asking you, you said you were going to look, I don't know if you did, but there was a fire up by Anderson Junction.
Yeah, so
that was yesterday. I just saw smoke everywhere.
Yeah, so that one, I'd have to look it up because I didn't actually write that article. I've been working on Cedar City stuff. But I do know that it's going on, and I think there's one or two fires that have happened recently that have been having to be dealt with up there. So.
Oh yes, well I guess it's that time of year, you know, and the wind lately, that's just got to be just horrible for all this stuff, just crazy.
Yeah.
So talking about,
the wind is awful. That's all I was gonna say. Sorry.
No, you're good. The wind is awful. It's just absolutely awful, especially where I live. It is windy all the time, all the time. Oh well, it's just something that you get used to. Oh, tell me, Kelsey, do you like to read? Are you quite a big reader besides, you know, Hemingway? Do you read a lot?
Yeah. I haven't had as many books on my plate. I don't know if you ever have time. I haven't had as many books on my plate as usual, but I would call myself a pretty avid reader.
Yeah. Are you reading anything right now?
So I am reading Call Me by Your Name. And
okay, I know that one.
I can't remember who it's by off the top of my head, but it's pretty interesting so far.
Yeah, I read that one about a year ago. Yeah, it was just a really interesting story. He's very very lyrical, the writer, I would say. Very pretty, you know, subject matter aside, I don't know, for me, I was like, it's kind of a Lolita feel.
Yeah.
A little bit, I don't know. You know, everybody to their own, but I thought that was really interesting. Do you have any suggestions for any good reads for any of our viewers? Anything that really stuck out to you or affected you in any way?
Definitely Hemingway. I'm definitely biased there. As far as other things, I'm trying to think about things that have stood out to me recently. You can't just put me on the spot like this because there's so many good books all the time.
You're like, as soon as we end, you're gonna be like, oh wait, that was
as soon as we finish the meeting, I'm gonna be like, oh, I should have said that. I mean, I would suggest Call Me by Your Name so far, if that counts as an answer to your question.
Yes. It's considered pretty well known. That was one of those modern books. It's hard to, I mean, I don't know what's considered a classic. My husband and I have these discussions all the time. Like, he feels like a classic, it has to be at least 100 years old. And I'm like, no, there's some amazing books that have been written like sooner than 100 years. In your opinion, what do you think makes a book a classic?
Um, I think it just entirely depends on what I mean, there are things that are considered widely as classics, but those things have tended to be around for a long time, and they continue to influence people through different generations, different decades, different millennia. And so I think it kind of just depends on what speaks to you.
Mm-hmm.
And what speaks to a majority of people for a long period of time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Hemingway's got some classics, right? That would be
Right.
some that would be considered classics for me, but there's a lot of people who are like, that's not what. Yeah, so it just kind of
It just didn't speak to them.
yeah, it just didn't speak to them. I mean, there's large groups of people that are not going to like Hemingway, and so that's not going to be what oh, this is a classic. That's not going to be that to them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and so it largely depends on the generation that you're in and what their views are and what they're going through that they can find literature to relate to. But there are the ones that just speak to generation after generation after generation after generation.
Mm-hmm.
And so those would be the ones that I probably consider classics.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with you. Just like Green Hills of Africa totally spoke to you. You find that one and it just really speaks to you.
Yeah. Hemingway,
Well, Kels. Mm-hmm.
sorry.
No, you're good.
Hemingway stuff has had a tendency to come into my life right at the perfect time. The first time I read The Old Man and the Sea, I was kind of going through some of the isolation feelings and things like that in high school. And then I read A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, which is one of his short stories, and it talks about suicide. And we had just had a family member commit suicide, like not even a couple months before I read that. And
Oh,
then I
wow.
read Green Hills of Africa right after I finished my first hunting season and things like that. So Hemingway's just had a tendency for me to come into my life when I didn't even know that I needed to read something like he wrote. And so
Mm-hmm.
I feel if you put something written by Hemingway in front of me, I can find a way to relate to it. And I think everyone kind of has those authors, if they're a big reader, they have those
Mm-hmm.
authors that they prefer like that. So
Yeah, I love that. And things will come into your space, I think, when you need it the most,
I
especially if you can really find yourself to relate to it.
exactly, yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kelsey, this has been so fun talking to you. I appreciate you coming on and talking
Yeah,
to me
thanks for
during
having
community reads.
me.
It's been so fun. And good luck with everything. Good luck with City Council
Thank you.
tomorrow and
Thanks.
all your writing endeavors. I'm going to be looking for you on St. George News.
All right.
Well, thanks for tuning in today for Community Reads. Join us every Tuesday at 2 as we interview authors and community leaders as they share with us their favorite reads. Next, Tuesday's interview will be with real estate agent Margie Hare. Check out our site, suu.edu/keeplearning.com for a complete list of our upcoming guests. The next 2 Wednesdays at 4 o'clock, I will be doing a special segment for our Community Reads, our Business and Leadership Edition. So tune in for that. I will be interviewing State Legislature Mike Winder tomorrow and the Dean of SUU, Mary Pearson, the following Wednesday. Dean Pearson's book discussion and gifts from SUU are in the mail. We encourage members to start reading as soon as they arrive and be ready to tune into that discussion for Wednesday, May 27th. From all of us here at SUU Community Education, we hope you enjoyed learning something new. You can watch the recording of this class at suu.edu/keeplearning or follow our YouTube channel at SUU Community Education. Thank you all for joining and have a great day. Thanks.